Hey everyone, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I talk to writers of all backgrounds and types and prod and pry into their childhood and psychoanalyze them a little bit and try to figure out how they became what they became. Not like it's a bad thing that they became writers. I'm just curious. It's not like they're criminals. Maybe they are, but that's not the point of the show. And at the end of every episode, we pick a random sentence from one of those books behind me and we craft a short story together. Today is very exciting. This episode, I actually talked to her a few months ago, but today is Julia Heaberlin, who is an international best-selling thriller author. She's known for her works like Black Eyed Susans, Paper Ghosts, and her most recent release, We Are All the Same in the Dark. And I love the cover of this book. I got to know Julia a little bit. We shared the same agent for a number of years. And so I got to know her that way. And she's a complete sweetheart, and a hell of a good writer. I mean, she is, she's had a lot of accolades over the years and she's only grown in fame. I mean, her books have sold to more than 20 countries. So, that's a good sign that you're doing okay. So we had a great time talking. We talked a little bit about, how she grew up, her hometown. She grew up in a very small town in Texas and how that kind of informed her writing. And also just how she coped with the pandemic. So again, we talked in March, so we're, still kind of just coming out of it at that point. And at the end, we make up a short story based on a sentence from a Stephen King novel. So that was very exciting. So anyway, enjoy. This is my conversation with the very talented Julia Heaberlin. So what's new?
So what's new? Now that's a very broad question. I'm working on my next novel. It's called Bad Red. It has a psychic and a conspiracy theorist in it.
Nice.
I'm suffering through the pandemic like everyone else.
I'd
like to give you a huge thumbs up, but not at the moment.
Well, listen, I'm super excited to talk to you today, and I appreciate you joining me for this. And I'm curious about you because I feel like I know you a little bit, but I don't know you a lot. And you've kind of just had some great success, and your writing is it resonates with me a lot. So I'm just
vice versa.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you. Did you grow up in Texas?
I did. I was born in Chicago, but moved here when I was 3. So I pretty much consider myself all Texan. I grew up in a very small town. And there was this very spooky mansion leering over the top of it on a hill. I don't know if that inspired me or not. I was very much a library girl. There wasn't that much to do in this small town. So
why did you go to that town? Why did your parents move over there?
My dad was a chemist first and then a manager for a company called Poco Graphite, which actually has some graphite on the moon, but they decided to settle this subsidiary in this small town.
Right, so how big of a town are we talking about? Like 10,000 people, something like that?
Oh no, when I was there, it was 3,200.
Oh, so, small.
small. There was, but the big world encroached. I remember there was a case where a woman's body was found in bags strewn along a road.
Oh my God.
And I don't know how that case ever got solved, but we were very aware of the big world. Fort Worth wasn't very far away, and my parents were very into arts and culture. So we took a lot of trips to Fort Worth, to the fabulous museum district there. So, I wasn't completely compressed.
But it almost sounds like you're growing up in like the set of True Detective limited series. That totally sounds like a hard scrabble kind of small town where occasionally, women are found in bags along the highway.
That only happened once.
Okay.
But it did affect me quite a bit.
I can imagine. I mean, well, so that's always the interesting thing is like, why certain people choose to write what they do. And I don't know if it's because of what's just interesting to them or it's just what they tend to be good at. Or if it's something like deeply rooted, because I'm sure you get the questions about like, well, where does all the darkness come from? And, I contend that it's there in everybody. It's just what you
Right.
choose to tap into or not. But certainly something like that incident informed you a bit. And it sounds like what did you study so you're growing up in this town, and where do you end up going to school?
Okay. So first of all, no one ever told me I was a good writer when I was younger. I don't know if that was true for you,
Oh, I never
but
wrote.
you never wrote at all.
Mm-mm.
That's very
Not until
interesting.
my 30s. Yeah.
I wrote a lot of diaries, and I ended up going to this very small town, again, a relatively small town college in Nacogdoches, Texas for 2 years, where it just wasn't the place for me. The famous thing, the coach of the Illinois team basketball
Mm-hmm.
is from Nacogdoches. He's the one who went 53-1, but
Oh,
that is
okay.
like sort of the,
That's the
but then I
celebrity.
went to University of Kansas. A friend of mine was there studying architecture, and I graduated with a degree in journalism from University of Kansas.
What was the interest in journalism?
People ask me if I had this mission. I don't know. I feel like I just floated into that. I was drawn to writing.
Yeah.
And I quote, liked people, which one of my professors told me was a really bad reason to go into journalism. I needed to have a more profound answer for that. But then I was a journalist for 20 years. And again, just very much drawn to true crime narratives. I was an editor mostly, and I
Mm-hmm.
really liked to assign stories where we learned about what happened to a victim of a crime like 10 years or 20 years later, either the victim or the family.
Hmm. I can see almost the interest in journalism being, well, I like writing, but I want to actually make some kind of money. Journalism at least offers, one of those outlets as opposed to, getting an MFA and then saying, well, I'm going to be a novelist and let's see how that goes. Did you have aspirations that early on, like early in your journalism career, or even back in college, where you say, yeah, I like this and I want to do this and I like the true crime aspect, but I really also want to write novels around this?
There wasn't that kind of straight path, at least not in my head. I knew when I was 15 or 16, I thought, I'm going to write a novel someday. And then I
That's
kept
great.
saying that every, twice a year until my husband finally said, if you don't quit and write a novel, you are never, ever going to do it. So, I quit pretty late in life, a successful career, and just went at it, and then spent 3 years before getting published, rejected by every major publisher. We had the same agent for a while who
Mm-hmm.
was just dogged in
Yep.
trying to get me published, and she absolutely did. But what that's like.
Yeah,
It's a tough road.
I would say, and to aspiring writers potentially listening to this, 3 years of rejection is considered pretty awesome. Like a lot of people would be pretty jealous of really only 3 years. That's fantastic. Some days I'm sitting there just staring at the wall, and my production comes in maybe the last 10 minutes, and I get
Right, me
enough
too.
done, or maybe I get an idea. Like right now, I'm just thinking about this book, and I'm like, going to spend this month just thinking about it. And if I sit for an hour and I have one idea that might be a scene, I write that down. I'm like, okay, cool. But then when it comes to the writing, then it'll be a little bit more, come a little bit more quickly. But my point is, like, if I write for 2 hours, I'm exhausted, and the last half an hour of that is probably pretty shitty, unless I'm totally inspired by something. What is your workload like when you sit down? I guess, and does it depend on where you're at in the book or edits or whatever?
Well, like you, I do it almost when I'm in a writing mode. I do it every single day, whether anything's coming out or not. Whether maybe I end up with one good paragraph, or I erase everything I wrote the next day.
Right.
But I write much longer. I can write. My best time is from noon to midnight, and I'll usually take a break in there,
It's terrible.
to exercise or, whatever. But I really like writing from about 9 to midnight.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting. When I wrote my last book, I was grieving the loss of a friend, and she died suddenly, and it was very traumatic. And every word of that book was difficult for me to write. And I didn't really get past that until, I want to say, like 3 months ago. It doesn't mean that I had writer's block. It was just a different place that I was in when I was writing. And then suddenly I had this burst of creative energy for the book that I'm working on now. And then I tried to go back into it and got stuck a little bit again. So there's just not a smooth path for me. But when I'm in it, I'm really in it. When you know how that is when you're rolling. And it's typically the action really helps propel things along, I think. But I don't have as much action as you do in your books. So I have, I guess, I think, right? When you say that, I have a little bit more psychological.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more of a psychological thriller.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But I mean, I think we're similar in the sense that we do like to kind of pursue that idea of like kind of being trapped in your own mind and
mind game.
What's real and what's not real, and paranoia. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. And, I try to limit my action. I mean, I don't limit my action, but, I try to approach it as, okay, I'm not just going to load up body counts here. I want, violence to me is like sex in books. It's like, it should be very limited and it should be meaningful and it should serve the story. Right. So
you are one of the best writers I know at doing that, I think.
Oh, thank you.
And, making it graphic and yet sometimes, and making it, tolerable and moving along so you aren't stopped. I have trouble. I stop at certain points in action, with not making it cliche. It's one of the hardest things I do is try to write action. So I really admire that about you. And when I say action, I don't mean, I think your books are very philosophical. So I don't mean like typical.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah. And it's because you get informed. I don't know if you're the same way, but I'll be informed. I don't read a lot of thrillers. I very rarely do I read thrillers unless I'm blurbing. I usually mostly read nonfiction, but I watch a lot of shows that could be classified as thrillers. And then if there's something that so that informs me, right? Like, why did that scene work to me? What was compelling about that scene? And I try to make my action kind of like that, of like, okay, I liked it because it was real. It felt like that's actually what would happen if somebody got shot in the leg. They wouldn't just get up and start fighting again. So I think, I don't know if you watch a lot of streaming shows or if that kind of informs your writing at all, but it does for me.
Oh, I do.
Yeah. I mean, it's just,
I for some reason I lost the one.
Yeah, we're cutting up.
Go ahead. I lost part of your last connection. Yeah.
I was just asking if you watched a lot of TV shows, but I mean, so when you're reading or watching something, what's the thing that draws you in? Like, what's compelling to you as opposed to something that you'll just like, oh, this is just like everything else?
Let's see. Well, it's a variety of things. I mean, I really do like True Detective. You mentioned amazing. That. Yep. And I think it's the characterizations that pull me into most things, but I like also the darkness. I loved the series Justified.
I haven't seen that.
Okay, well, I recommend it. It's
I'm writing it down. Justified.
And then recently I loved something called Call My Agent, which is a French series that you have to watch in subtitles, but it's hilarious. It's literally about an agency for movie stars, and it apparently is very realistic, and you will be able to relate to the publishing industry when you watch it too. But it's hilarious, and you don't mind the subtitles at all. So it's really, is the writing good? Are the characters good? If those things are in place, I'll watch anything, and I'll try to pick up particularly in things like True Detective, okay, why am I so intrigued? How can I do that in my novel?
Right, right. I love breaking scenes down and just really like, I mean, to the point that I'm sure it's completely annoying to my girlfriend, but I'll pause it and be like, did you see how he said that? Where the camera went after that, or that was all done in one take? Did you notice that? Because it does it. All of that has such an impact. So you mentioned the publishing industry. I'm just curious, as you're navigating, you're spending these years getting rejected, and then you start to have success. It was it a whole learning process about the industry for you? I mean, it totally was for me because I didn't know anything about writing, but just,
Oh,
I mean, and what were some of the kind of highs and lows of that?
well, you think it's all about art and whether you're writing something good. It's not about that at all. It's about a business,
Right.
making money, and whether you're fitting into trends and things like that. Those 3 years were tough, but the worst thing was my publisher dropped Black Eyed Susans, which turned out to be so far, I think, my most successful book, but
Hmm.
they dropped the option, and that was it. It was goodbye. And what are you going to do now? I felt like I was going to have to start all over again.
Yeah.
So that was my worst experience with the publishing industry, is just knowing how fragile everything is. Um,
Everything.
and your ego is sort of destroyed, but you have to go back in there and say, no, this is good. I'm going to get it published. And so when I talk to writers, it's really about persistence, just persistence and luck. All those things have to, and then, some talent, have to, like, coalesce at the same time for you to succeed. But if you don't have the persistence, you could be stopping 1 week short of your success.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're selling yourself a little bit short because I think the talent, I mean, the book still has to be good, right? People are going to be, there's a lot of people who write a lot of books and they don't get published because maybe they're not quite there yet in terms of captivating people. Yeah, all those other factors are totally true, trends and all those kinds of things. But I think your writing is so strong that, you know, that was a huge part of why you've become
Well, you're
at the
really
station
nice
you're
to
at.
say that, but I have a question for you. Do you ever feel like you're really good? I never feel like I'm really good.
Never. No,
And
I don't. No, and never. I mean, there will be points in time, and it's funny. I never look back at my books unless I'm like, oh, I have to do reading. Let me pick something out, and I'll go through it, and I'll be like, and I'm always finding like, oh, why didn't I just write it like shorter? Like it's so much, But then I'll find scenes. I'm like, I kind of like that scene, but it's. I don't look back and be like, oh, this was a masterpiece. you know, I'm always looking forward to them. Like, I can't wait for my next book because I really want to be better. I want to continuously
right,
get better.
right.
And that's exciting to
You
me.
absolutely do. I mean, there's just no question. Every book is better than the last,
It's
which is
it,
great because you started at a strong point. So,
you're being very nice to me. I mean, I just, and what you said about the industry is true. And I think that's one thing that I talk about a lot is like, you're creating art, but you're also creating a commodity, right? And you are one of many players in this game, just as if you were in corporate America and sitting in a conference room. You are one voice and you're an important voice, but you have to be able to, I mean, you got to be able to play well with others. You've got to, that doesn't mean you have to roll over and do whatever one says, but you have to be a team player because otherwise no one's going to want to do business with you. So my corporate background has been very helpful for me to like know how
not
to
bad.
like, negotiate with people and stand for, there's very few times I get edits where I'm like, that's bullshit. I'm not going to do that. Like, most of the time I'm like, oh, you're totally right. Thank you for helping make this book better.
Editors are
Um,
very important.
they are. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's your experience as well, but I mean, there's very few times where, and if I ever push back on an edit, it's never a major point. I don't know if that's what your experience has been with that.
Uh, well, I would say sometimes I do uh, push back. I in the case of We Are All the Same in the Dark, I had two editors because I actually sell more books in the UK than I do in the US. is where I
Mm,
broke out first. So I have
I
two
remember that.
editors at the same time, at least this time, at the same time, uh, writing comments on the side. And let me tell you, that's pretty dizzying. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't. I mean, mostly they're in the same place. But yes, keeping my voice and what I have in mind um, sometimes ends up with me just saying no, and they always say okay. And there was a twist in the middle of this book that I thought they were all going to say absolutely no, you can't do that, and neither of them said that, which
Hmm.
I am forever grateful for. So
It's also
I have
unpredictable,
very
isn't
good
it?
editors, and the books get much better through their work. But then I am a little stubborn sometimes. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, I don't know if I have that same confidence because, every time I get a note, it always just feels like, oh, yeah, I can see how you're right there. Um, and I'll even go through phases where I'll be writing something and I'm kind of curious about your writing after your friend passed. You said that was a real slog. Um, did that did that event actually, I know it made the writing more difficult, but did it actually make your writing different? Is that voice kind of being pulled by that event?
I definitely think so. I think it's my darkest book. I think it deals more with the randomness of life. And I'll just tell you what happened because I had a lot of trauma afterward. But she fell down my staircase um, and
Oh my
and
goodness.
died. And she had they think she had a stroke, um, but there is nothing in it that didn't make me feel guilt about that event as well. So it was just completely traumatic in every way, and it infused the book for sure. The book is dedicated to her. um, she was um, an immigrant who had just gotten her citizenship after having her green card and working here for years and years, and was about to take her oath the next month. There were so many um, difficult things about this, and she was young. So anyway, that happened before the pandemic, and I feel like I've never sort of gotten back to that. um, I don't want to say there's a layer of depression over everything, but there probably is. There's a layer of depression over the whole world right now.
Hmm.
So I've worked through that, and now I'm working through this, and it does not make me special in any way. People have traumatic experiences all the time, but it did make it very difficult to write. And in this next book, for the first time, I felt that kind of joy that you feel
Hmm.
when you're writing, and you feel like you're writing well.
What was So were you already into this book um, when that happened, or you started writing afterwards?
I was actually writing a different book, and something in it reminded me too much of her. So I started completely over with a new book.
Okay.
Um,
And when your publisher got it, when your editor got it, was there an acknowledgement of like, wow, this feels a different, this feels darker, this feels like you were going through something?
they didn't actually say that out loud, but they knew what had happened, because of course
Yeah.
they'd had to allow me extra time to start another book,
Right.
you know.
Right. Right.
Um, so but I'm sure they felt it, but they still were pretty tough in their edits. So I say good for them,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Let
yeah,
nothing stand in the way of
right.
making the book better.
Right. I mean, I find that interesting. I mean, I've gone through periods where, like, a book that's coming out next year, this guy kind of descends into insanity in his house, and over a period of time. And I really enjoyed writing those scenes where he started to slip further and further away. And I got very proud of myself because I'm like, all right, this is really good stuff. And then in retrospect, after getting the edits back, they're like, okay, we don't need to be so much into his head all the time. And I'm like, oh, you're totally right. But I was just in that mindset of where I just wanted to. So I guess my point is, like, I think it's easy to get into a groove of writing that can be a disconnect with what actually is going to be ultimately entertaining and wanted.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
I was afraid it was too dark.
yeah.
I couldn't see. I had no perspective.
See, and that's my thing is like, I totally agree. I lose a lot of perspective. So that's why I'm so eager to take on edits, because I just assume that I'm doing something wrong most of the time. Because I've always viewed,
That's true.
I've always viewed criticism and rejection as being pretty favorable, like, as favorable as it can be, because it's massive. It's a massive opportunity to learn. And that's how I learned. I learned through rejection because
Exactly, from other people. And being a journalist, there are 10 different ways to write the same story. So that was one benefit of journalism and going into writing novels, is if somebody said, well, have you thought about doing it this way? That did not offend me. Like you say, it was sort of like, well, no, that's kind of an interesting idea.
right. Well, and with journalism, it's interesting because the story is still the story, right? The facts are
Right.
still the facts. I think with novels, I'm always fascinated by the idea of, like, if I had just done something, if I had sat down and had a different thought this one day, the second half of this book could have been entirely different, and it probably would have been just as good or better or whatever. There's a
Right.
million different stories out of this story, and this is what it
Right.
happens to be. And I don't know if you go through and end up changing a lot, or if how much you end up getting rid of in the editing process. But do you find yourself at the end be like, oh, but what if it had gone this way instead, and feeling pulled to, like, rewrite in a different
Well, yeah,
direction?
after it's published, I think, well, why didn't I do this instead? But I'm thinking about this. Repeat the question. Repeat the question. Let me focus.
I'm just wondering, like, it's rare for me to, like, say I'm going to lop off the last 100 pages
Yeah,
because
no. The basic structure always stays the same, but in the I don't know about you, but I write completely through the characters, and I don't have an outline and I don't have a plot.
same.
And so by the time I reach the end, there are too many plots. So generally I have to figure out how to pull, one of those out, like a thread that's going to, tear everything apart. It's difficult
It
to
is.
take that one thread out. And then for me, the most difficult part of writing a book is the end.
Yeah.
Every single time, because I know if I screw up the end, they're just going to say, just like every movie, it's like, oh, well, it had a terrible ending. That's what people will remember. They won't remember the rest of the book as being good. It's very important. Um, so I would say the structure stays the same. If anything changes, sometimes it might be the ending. And I might remove a character, something like that. I might make, characters more likable or less likable, or a little more in depth. But the plot essentially stays the same.
Yeah. I mean, our writing style is similar. I don't outline. I don't even know what the end is until I'm probably 80% of the way in.
Me too.
Yeah. And to me, writing the ending is thrilling because it's usually this very, like, kind of philosophical feel for me. That's how, and I also know that, 60% of people might like the ending, which means, 40% hate it.
Right.
I'm okay with that. And I love ambiguity.
Me too. Readers like things tied up in bows, though.
They really do. And it's frustrating because I'll recognize that in myself as well. If I'm watching a show or reading a book, I kind of like some closure, but I love writing. That being said, I love, like, the end of Inception and the end of The Sopranos. You're like, I don't know what happened, but now it's my responsibility to let it be whatever I want it to be.
It's more like real life,
I think so too, which is how you were saying, you're writing through your characters and you don't outline. You're just kind of here. I'm going through their day and I don't know what's around that corner. And that's, to me, that's the most thrilling thing. It's like,
it is. It's exciting.
First person, present tense. And and you're like, you don't know that, because that's life. You don't know what happens next. Have you as you approach every new novel, do you think about like, I want to do a totally different POV, or I want to write from this perspective or from this type of character? I want to do, do you challenge yourself that way, or do you feel like I want to stay within the realms of what makes me happiest when I write in terms of characters?
Well, there's a marketing aspect to that too, because
True.
as you know, readers are, if they like you and are following you, they want something that feels like it has the same DNA.
Yeah.
So I think I try to maintain that DNA, but I will try to improve something or make each book. I write standalones too, so
Yep.
um in each book, the way I challenge myself is to make one aspect of my writing better. Like I think in uh the last book, it was atmosphere. I think in Paper Ghosts, where you had a young girl and a serial killer on a crazy road trip, or possible serial killer on a crazy road trip, I learned to write better dialogue. So I feel like I'm getting better at some aspect in every book, and then and someday it's all going to come together
Is
in,
that
in the perfect book, right?
is that so? That's a conscious choice you make, because that's really interesting. It's like the next book, I'm going to do everything that I normally do, but I'm going to focus on making the dialogue better. That you set out to do that.
No, it just happens to be the
Okay.
way it works out, because I always felt I was particularly weak at dialogue, and now dialogue is my absolute favorite thing to write.
It's so
Um,
much fun to write.
right. So each book teaches you something else.
Yeah.
But as far as setting out, I always just have just the tiniest bit of an idea. Like with Black Eyed Susans, it was sort of like a bird's eye view of a young girl in a field of bones and yellow and black flowers. That was pretty
Right.
much it. I knew I wanted to write about DNA, using mitochondrial DNA to identify bones, because I'd just done a story on a legendary forensic scientist for a magazine. So I knew I wanted to combine all those things. But so with the current book I'm writing, I'm fascinated that psychics are more popular right now than ever because
Mm-hmm.
of the pandemic. And also this whole idea of, conspiracy theory and how it is ruling our culture. So I knew I wanted to have this kind of battle between the two things, and then also science. The psychic is also an astrophysicist, so she has to deal with the conflict of these two things. I've listened to a ton of conspiracy theory podcasts until I'm almost becoming one. It's scary. My son and husband are pulling me out of dark holes sometimes, because hey, that could really be true, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem with conspiracy theories. There's a little thread of truth in most of them. Not all of them, believe me. But you look at the Kennedys, or
Right.
those kinds of things.
Right. Well, yeah, sure. There's enough to get people to attach to it before the claws really deepen into the flesh on that. I mean, that's so. I mean, and you probably, certainly with your journalism background, the research is probably very interesting to you and compelling to you, I assume.
Well, and that's the thing. I always want there to be a layer of something that I am telling people about. I think as in fiction, we have like maybe even a greater responsibility to be accurate, because people are being entertained. We can kind of really teach them about something as much as nonfiction does. So I am extremely dedicated to the research. And Black Eyed Susans, I stood outside the death house during an execution. I interviewed death penalty attorneys. I
Oh, wow.
interviewed this forensic scientist who, worked at 9/11. And so I'm going to have a psychic reading on Zoom. But, my mother has dementia, and I know that you have that theme in your books of memory and
Yeah.
loss of memory in your books as well. So I just want people to know what it's really like. And with We Are All the Same in the Dark, it became a completely different book, because I interviewed a number of women who only had one eye. One of the primary characters in the book only has one eye. And everything I thought about what that would be like was completely wrong. So, they're able to wear their eyes and keep it a secret. And why would they want to do that? And, you know, just, I can't even explain how much the emotional component of their lives affected the book.
That's interesting, because then you can look at that and say, well, I could write that character. I can write a person with one eye and have that kind of hubris about it. And probably with one interview, you're like, I can't believe I was even thinking about writing this book.
Right. It's embarrassing. The questions you ask are embarrassing. I mean, there are no bad questions, right? That's what they say when you talk to experts. I just go with that philosophy because I ask a lot of stupid questions. I mean, when I started, I Googled glass eye.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was, and eyes are not, prosthetic eyes are not glass. They're like shaped like contacts. They're not round. And, you know, they're, this particular ocularist in Dallas who helped me, who turned out to be one of the best in the world, paints them by hand, like, and they're perfect twins to the other eye. That's so amazing. It was, I think the research is what I almost like the best about the books, because it changes my perspective on everything. Like, I don't think I'll ever use the word disabled or disability again. And it leaves me with these relationships that I carry through my life. So that is such a gift.
And that really does sound like a direct through line from your work as a journalist, right? Because it's like, that's what you did. You talked to people and you found out information. So because I'm a little bit different from you, I don't particularly like research. I get bored easily.
How do you do it? Do you do it? I mean, because I do a lot of Google too. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
But how do you generally research?
Well, I mean, it depends on what I'm writing. A lot of my books don't necessarily have, you know, a person who's a scientist or something like that. This book that's coming out right now, there's a secondary character who's a detective. And that was the first time I've ever done that, where I kind of varied or kind of waded into a procedural. But I've got a buddy who's a detective in California. So I'm like, all right, can you just read this and make sure? If I would interview him.
Become my buddy too. I like, well,
I mean, I dedicated the book to him because it really helped me out. But generally speaking, I'm walking through the eyes of somebody who has their own human experiences, but aren't necessarily like I said, a scientist. So, or, you know, if somebody points a gun at them, someone's got a gun. I don't know what kind of gun it is. So it helps me not to have to research as much. And you know, now I'm creating fictional towns, and so I'm like, now I can do whatever I want. I don't have to stay accurate to anything. But again,
can you shoot a gun, by the way? Can I ask that question?
I've shot guns before, but it's been years and years and years that they kind of freak me out. But because you're Texan, are you like a big gun person?
Well, you know, my mother's from Kentucky. I can remember her going in the garden and just shooting a gun in the air to get all the grackles out of her garden. This tiny little woman, but I have shot guns like you, but I don't own a gun. And where I've made my biggest mistakes in books is where someone in Texas will point out that gun does not even have a safety. You know, it's embarrassing. Right. So now I run all my gun stuff by a friend who knows a lot about guns. So
that's good.
You can be tricked up all the time. You can do so much research, and then you find like the tiniest thing, like hunting season. You don't hunt doves in this month, you know? I mean, just things like that. It's
right.
Yeah. 80,000 words or whatever, you know?
Right. I'm very good at letting go and just be like, yep, I'm not going to please everybody. Somebody's going to find a problem with it. And yeah, I definitely do hear those things, but I kind of feel like, you know, if most people could buy this, that makes me happy. So
yeah,
maybe that's just
yeah. It is. We're so lucky just to be able to do what we love. That's
yep. And so on that note, we're going to now do the thing that you've been looking forward to the most.
Yeah.
Which is storytelling. I just actually interviewed a nonfiction author a couple days ago, so we got to do storytelling with the nonfiction author. So that was fun too. This will be very short, 3 minutes or so. I'm going to have you pick a book from behind me, however we want to do it. Some people just choose a color or whatever, or we can count the number of books, or I can just go grab one. You're going to pick a sentence, and I'll read that sentence, and then you add whatever you want, 1, 2, 3 sentences. Then I'll go, and we'll just do it for a few minutes and see how dark or
I've told Carter that don't consider myself a very articulate person, except when I put my fingers on the keys. So we'll see how this goes. I want that red book that's behind you it's on my right, your left. It's on the second shelf up. Do you see it?
Yeah, on the very right, like by the little Haunted Mansion playhouse.
I don't know if I can see that. Can you see where my finger's pointing? Probably not. The far shelf on your left.
By the Crows poster?
No, the other side.
Okay, far left.
Okay.
Second shelf. Oh, I see. That's my Stephen King row. The second to the bottom.
Yes, second to the bottom, the bright red book. It's like 4 over.
Yeah.
Do you see it?
I think it's Stephen King. Yeah.
This one, am I doing this right? That's it.
Was that the one?
That's the one.
You chose Lisey's story, Stephen King.
I have not actually read that Stephen King, but I know what a huge fan you are, and I think he's one of the greatest writers of all time myself.
100% agree. Yeah, and they're not all good, but most of them are great.
He throws up, but sometimes it's just like brilliant, and that makes up for whatever book is not brilliant.
So choose a page between 1 and 500.
Let's say 122.
Okay, and
I can do this part.
Yeah, this part's easy. Choose a sentence between 1 and 5.
1 and 5. Okay, 3.
She turns towards the dim maw of the kitchen. The apartment consists of only that in the bedroom, and catches sight of him curled up in bed.
She thinks hard about whether she wants to go curl up against his back or stab him in the throat.
She walks over to the dresser where she had left a pair of scissors. They had a slight tinge of rust on them, and she decided she could perhaps do both.
She picks up the scissors. They're cool in her hand. She walks over to the bed. She curls up behind him and feels his warmth and holds the scissors a millimeter of an inch above his throat.
He didn't stir, and she could hear the soft murmurs of his breath. She traced a fingernail along the back of his neck and wondered how many other mouths had kissed there. She knew of at least 3.
She thinks in this moment that if she does what she really wants to do, which is to plunge the scissors deep into his throat, that it will change everything.
She touches the point of the scissors against his flesh, which gives a millimeter. And as romantic as she thinks the notion of committing this act is, she takes a moment to consider how much force would actually be required. How far back would she have to hold her hand before plunging it down? Could she actually do this?
She draws the scissors across his throat until it draws a little blood. He doesn't wake. She knows he's taken a sleeping pill. She thinks, I've begun. Should I go the rest of the way?
3 droplets of blood fall onto the sheets below. The 2,000 thread count Egyptian cotton she paid for. He never appreciated those sheets. She decided she could do this.
But first, she places her lips in that place and taste his blood.
I think we call it there. That's a beautiful way to end it. Because see, the ambiguity. Wow, that went dark.
Again, much better writing.
No, that was great. That was fantastic. Yeah.
What really is the next sentence in that book, in that spot?
I think the doorbell rings.
The doorbell rings, okay.
I think somebody's
Much less interesting.
I think somebody's at the door right before she does it. I don't know. That was good. It usually goes very dark, so that was in line with some of.
Well, we're with you, Carter. We got to go there.
Am I the common denominator and all that?
Yes, I think so.
Well, awesome. Listen, it was great talking to you. I'm so happy for all of your success, and I just think you're a brilliant writer, and I'm really thrilled to have gotten a chance to get to know you a little bit better today, and you know, I'm just so thankful for you.
Ditto. I'm such a great admirer of yours. Really appreciate this. You're a terrific interview. One of the best. I mean, really, just very relaxed. You made me feel very relaxed. So anyway, good luck to all the writers out there. You can do it.
Thanks, Julie. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was my conversation with Julia. She was great, very revealing, you know, definitely revealed some pretty personal stuff about how, you know, tragedy has affected her writing and impacted it recently. And, you know, just a tremendous person and just a wonderful conversation. So I'm very grateful to have had the time to spend with her. If you want to find out more about Julia, you can go to her website, which is juliaheaberlin.com. You can look at the text below because it's not necessarily the easiest thing to spell. And if you want to find out more about me or subscribe to my newsletter, you can just go to carterwilson.com. And I will tell you, my newsletter, I work very hard on it, once a month only, and there's usually pictures of my cat. So, you know, how can you go wrong? In the meantime, more episodes coming out soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.